Hello everyone. So today we're going to talk about the Declaration of Independence. So once again, if you need to pause the video as I'm going through it to write down your notes, by all means go ahead and pause it. And let's go ahead and proceed. So what exactly is the Declaration? It's a 4-part letter written by the colonists to King George explaining to him why they no longer want to be ruled by him. If you recall from U.S. history, a lot of issues occurred before the War of Independence occurred. The document itself gives a list of reasons and grievances against the king and why they want to break away. It was primarily written by Thomas Jefferson, as some of you guys may already know, in the summer of 1776. But he was helped by a 5-member committee. One of the members from the committee was Benjamin Franklin, and they would help him, Thomas Jefferson, in making some edits or making suggestions into the document itself. In order for this declaration to be quote-unquote approved or sent off to the king, all 13 states needed to agree upon it. So when they all got together during the Second Continental Congress, they all need to agree that, hey, this declaration that we're making is accurate, and it's going to be what we are going to use to essentially break away from England. So after much debating, I'm sure you've all heard the stories of how hot that summer was. The Continental Congress finally agreed upon to adopt it on July 4th, 1776. Now, not everybody signed up on it, but of course, most famously, John Hancock wrote his name big enough so that, as he put it, the king can see it from all the way across the ocean. Now, as we said previously, the letter was essentially for the king so that he can see what is going on, why they have grievances against the king himself. So the British government was in debt after the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War was also known as the French and Indian War. So as Britain was having all these different wars, not only in the colonies, but also in Europe, they needed money. The government was broke. So Parliament over in England decided to pass several laws to tax the colonists. And the colonists were not happy about this. One of the first laws that passed was the Stamp Act in 1765. This basically established that anybody who bought paper, books, anything that was printed basically had to pay some form of tax. Another tax that passed was the Townshend Act, which basically incorporated adding new taxes onto imported goods, paint, lead, glass, and especially tea. Tea was something that was kind of huge for a lot of the colonists because drinking tea is kind of a cultural thing for a lot of the British. And of course, the American colonists were descendants of the British. After the Boston Tea Party, if you recall, England was not very happy, and they wanted to punish the Bostonians, particularly Massachusetts. So they passed the Coercive Acts in 1774. Now, one of the acts that had been implemented by the Crown in 1774 was the allowance of British soldiers to live in colonist home. This was primarily to intimidate the colonists, especially the Bostonians, since they decided to basically destroy a lot of the tea that was being imported. They also closed down the harbors as well as forbidding the colonists to assemble. So afterwards, the First Continental Congress was formed, in which all 13 colonies came together for the first time and agreed to boycott and petition the king and his laws that he had established. So what influenced Thomas Jefferson in his writing of the Declaration of Independence? Well, primarily it was several Enlightenment thinkers. If you recall from world history, during the Enlightenment period, there were several authors who had challenged this idea of the divine right of kings and that man had these several natural laws. One of these Enlightenment thinkers was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He believed that government was best small and weak. People are naturally good, so they can govern themselves. Baron Montesquieu, he believed that absolute power corrupts anyone. And John Locke, of course, life, liberty, and property. And we see these ideas in the Declaration of Independence. We see that the colonists are upset and tired of having one person, an absolute monarch, control their daily lives. And most notably, we see John Locke's idea of life, liberty, and property in the Declaration of Independence itself, where Thomas Jefferson writes, pursuit of life, liberty, and he changed the word property into happiness. But still, Thomas Jefferson's main ideas were taken from Enlightenment thinkers. So going back to the Declaration of Independence itself, it was broken up into 4 parts. We have the preamble, the Declaration of Natural Rights, a list of grievances against the king, and the Resolution of Independence. So the preamble. So the preamble is basically kind of like an introduction. It gives a reason on why the colonists should break away from Great Britain, why they are writing this document in the first place, why they are upset at the current situation that is currently happening in the colonies. The second part, the Declaration of Natural Rights. It is basically a list of rights that the citizens have, and that the government should be protecting those rights. So when we look at the Declaration of Independence next in our assignment, you will see that there is a list of every single thing that the king has taken away from these colonists. A list of grievances is basically everything that's happened to the colonies, from the taxation to the housing of troops in their houses, and so on and so forth. And then finally, the last part, the resolution, or the conclusion, is tying everything together and why they're now going to be independent. So this final part is basically explaining to the king, because of everything you've done, of everything that you've taken away from us, this is the reason why we're going to break away from you, and you are no longer going to rule us over. Okay? So what's the lasting impact of the Declaration of Independence? The document itself brought together the colonists to fight against the British. It was a rally cry, a fighting cry for them to get together and fight against one common enemy, who was the king and the British. This was the first ever declaration ever made, especially in the new Western world, in the Americas. Never before has a colony basically told its colonizers, hey, we are no longer be ruled by you, so get out of here. This declaration would actually be copied by many other colonies in the Americas in the future. Most notably, France would actually follow suit and make their own declaration known as the Declaration of Rights in Man. And they somewhat used the Declaration of Independence to model after it. But again, this is the first time we see a colony in the Americas declaring itself independent. We will see this later with Haiti. We will see this later with Mexico, Brazil, so on and so forth. So this is one of the first ever types of documents ever established in this way. So let's go over now the assignment for this slide. So this one is a little bit longer. You guys are going to be reading over the document itself, and you're going to be answering these questions here. As you see, it's broken up into 2 parts, part 1 and part 2. So you click on here, and it will take you over to the Declaration of Independence. Now, as you see, I've highlighted and broken up the declaration itself into its 4 parts. So as you see here, the preamble is highlighted. So all of this right here will be the preamble. The Declaration of Natural Rights will be right here. The grievances are all going to be underneath here. And the Resolution of Independence will be right here. Okay? So once you have read that, you will answer the following questions. And as you can see here, part 1 has just basic answer 1 through 8. Each one is worth a point. And then part 2, you're going to summarize the Declaration of Independence for a modern audience. So meaning that if the United States wasn't independent and was still being ruled by the British in modern times, how would you change the verbiage? Because if you look at the Declaration from the written standpoints, you'll see that a lot of terms are not somewhat used in common word today. So, for example, the words nor, we have been wanting, and attentions of our British brethren. Like, how would you change that? Or maybe you would change the verbiage for grievances. So for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, you can write, for the list of grievance, housing troops in our homes, something like that. So you would write that in each part. So we have the preamble, Declaration of Natural Rights, grievances, and Resolution of Independence. So you would just basically write out 3 sentences in each section and make it into your own form of wording. Okay? All right, guys. Good luck.